Hi guys, we are getting ready to start to read our Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie. It is the Oregon Trail Diary of Hattie Campbell, and remember this setting is in 1847. I'm sorry. She started they started in Boonesville, Missouri, or otherwise known as Missouri, and they are traveling to Oregon. They are over halfway at this point in their travel to Oregon. They started in Missouri. They traveled up to the Missouri River. They got on a steamboat and went up on the Missouri River to Independence. At Independence, they got off of the steamboat, and they had some of their belongings with them, like trunks full of treasures, like grandma's quilt or such things that they wanted to keep that was very important to them. But then they bought oxen, they bought supplies they needed for the trail. They waited until about April, and then they went on their trail with a other bunch of people. I'm not positive, I don't want to give you a wrong number, but I know it was over 30 different different wagons. They are at the point right now where they've already had to split with some people that were going to California. So the rest of the people are going to Oregon. Now there were some people that were going to continue to go to Oregon, but they've decided they like what they've seen, so they decided just to homestead in the area that they were at. Now, do not think that this has been easy. Along the way, they've had heartache. They've had some death in the some new mamas die. They've had poor Hattie, who is a little girl, made stew, and she fed some kids some what she thought was veggies, that like wild veggies, as she was going along, and ended up being poisonous, a poison food, a poison vegetable or plant, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and it killed 3 kids. So it's not been easy. Some kids have been run over by a wagon and have died, but there's been some awesome things too, like there's been weddings and there's been babies being born and just some awesome things too. So life has not been easy as they've been going along. Today we are going to start on page 96, and we are at Sheep Rock, and that is not on my map, so I'm not going to show you that quite yet. One side of Sheep Rock rises up like a stone wall. Pine trees surrounded on all sides, and among the cliffs are mountain sheep. Tall Joe said that back in '42, John C. Fremont explored this place and named it Sheep Rock. We're still on Bear River. It's the same beautiful green as Pepper's Eyes and Wade's. When we saw how deep it is, we were relieved to learn it makes a sharp turn south and we won't have to cross it. Tall Joe says it empties into the Great Salt Lake. He followed it once. An amazing sight has made us all want to camp for several days. There are pools bubbling up with hot water. There's even one with a geyser called Steamboat. I wonder, have you ever heard of Steamboat before? Because somehow it makes a high-pitched whistle that sounds just like a boat on the Missouri. Hearing it makes me so happy, homesick. I almost started bawling. Folks are swimming and floating in the water and drinking it. To me, it smells like eggs on the rotten side, but the taste ain't bad at all. Wade and Gideon dared each other to sit on the geyser. They took turns, and oh, what an event. While Pepper and I watched from the banks, Gideon swam out to the center and waited. Soon enough, heavy bubbles began lifting him up and up. His arms and legs waved like a turtle's on its back as the geyser bounced him up and down. By the time it stopped, Gideon had lost his shirt. Wade rode the geyser next and lost his pants, which caused folks to erupt in hilarious laughter, so the day went. I was so pleased to have Pepper to myself all afternoon. We lay in the grass and stared at the clouds. I asked her what it was like to have a husband. After a long while, she turned her face toward me. How pretty she looked, her green eyes and cheeks high with color. Oh, Hattie, you are such a dear. Well, marriage is, it's the most wonderful of wonderfuls. Someday you'll understand. I wish Pepper will tell me exactly what she means, what it really is truly like to be loved by a man. Later, at supper, Ma stirred several cups of sugar and a pint of raspberries into a pail of mineral water. Mrs. Big did the same with citrus syrup to make lemonade, and they was the most delicious, bubbly drinks any of us had ever tasted. Pepper and I drank so much, though, we were not hungry for supper, and I had a stomach ache all night long. She told me the next day she did too. Tall Joe said on one of the pools was named Beer Spring because mountain men swear they get drunk after a few sips, but Pa says that's likely yet another tall tale. Before bed, Jake and Ben complained and pushed at each other all the day. They argued with me. When I said it was time to unroll their blankets, I'm tired of being their sister. I wonder, have you ever felt like that before? Have you ever thought, oh, I'm so tired of my brothers and sisters? I have felt like that before. There's been times that I'm just like, can we have a break from each other? I'm sure you've had that feelings too. And if you're an only child, think about when you're at school and you're kind of like sick and tired of other kids kind of like complaining or doing something that you don't like. I'm sure you've kind of had that feeling at a time or two. 2 days later, 2 days north of the Soda Springs, the sky turned black and the air cold. In an instant, a wind picked up so fierce I had to hold my bonnet on with both hands, even though it was tied under my chin. My skirt blew back so tight it looked like I was wearing men's trousers. When the hail hit, we stopped the wagons and ran for cover. The poor animals moaned and cried, but there was no way we could protect them. It felt like somebody was pelting us with rocks. In an instant, my arms and neck were bruised. The hailstones bounced like popping corn. Soon the ground was white. Many of the wagon tops, ours included, ended up with holes. The storm passed as quick as it started and flooded the road so that the mud stuck to the wheels as we pulled out. It was our turn to be in the lead because of the storm. We thought nothing of the abandoned wagon we came upon. Its cover also had holes. But when Tall Joe came back from inspecting it, his face told a different story. Folks, those holes ain't from hailstorms. Tall Joe said. He held up an arrow with feathers on its end. Oh no, what do you think happened? Quick as you please, the men began searching in case someone from the wagon was left behind. The Indians had stolen the mules and whatever treasures possible, for there was a trail of scattered goods. Wade and Gideon made a gruesome discovery. About 200 yards away, inside a thicket of sagebrush, was a pair of feet sticking out of a grave. Men's we think because they were big with hairy toes. It seems that after he was buried, the Indians came back and dug deep enough to steal his boots. Ew. Then left him just like we found him. I thought it could have been Pa if we'd taken that shortcut My stomach felt tight, thinking Indians might have been watching us and that they might not be friendly. There was some talk about digging up the poor fellow to see who he was, but Tall Joe said it wouldn't be pretty for that for sure, and we'll be likely find out when we get to Fort Hall in just a few days north. He and Pa shoveled dirt to cover the dead man's feet, and we piled rocks on top to keep the animals away. It was a solemn group that pulled out. Pepper and I and Wade walked together next to the wagon Gideon was driving. We watched the horizons more and wonder what will happen if we see Indians. This is a land of sagebrush and rock, much of it black. Tall Joe says it is from volcanoes, and that the western part of the continent is full of them. Old ones that don't erupt anymore. Our animals pull hard and slow and they're plumb wore out. Tall Joe rides back and forth among the wagons, ordering folks to lighten their loads again. Some families pile belongings neatly to the side of the trail, others heaving things out, letting them land wherever. I keep my eye on Mrs. Kinkler but she has not thrown anything away. Do you remember what we know about Mrs. Kinkler? Poor Mrs. Kinkler is a theft. She steals things. And we've learned that the day before they left, that Mrs. Kinkler and her husband and another neighbor left, their whole house burnt down with their adult children in there. So the only thing that Mrs. Big and Mr. Big has said is that they think that maybe the reason that that Mrs. Kinkler is stealing things is because maybe she is grieving, and that's the only way that she is like kind of processing that, which is not okay, that she should not be stealing. But Hattie is the only one that has caught her, and Hattie has only told Mrs. and Mr. Biggs. She hasn't said anything to her parents because she's afraid that Ma will be so fit to be tied, because she didn't want to go really in the first place. And she's afraid that her mom will be super upset, or that her mom won't even believe her. So they're kind of waiting it out to see what that looks like next. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I keep an eye on Mrs. Kinkler, but she has not thrown anything away. 2 of her oxen dropped dead yesterday, 1 today, so now there are 3 pulling. Tall Joe warned her again. We'll leave you behind, madam. You and your junk and your husband. Better start tossing. He told her that a while ago, and she wouldn't do anything. Every day there are at least 2 animals to butcher, either cows, horses, or oxen. What meat we don't eat, the women cut into strips for jerky. We hang them from the hoops inside our wagons, and the dry air toughens them pretty quick. The layers of dust seem to keep the flies and yellow jackets away. So I was going to show you on the wagon. This is the hoops that they're talking about. So their wagon with the hail got got holes in there, but then they're cutting the meat in strips, and then they'll put those over those hoops to dry. Okay, so now they are at Fort Hall, which is right here. Aunt June was excited to see the trading post because Narcissa Whitman had been here and wrote to her about it. That is like a cousin of theirs. if I remember correctly, had been here and wrote to her about it. I think it looks like all the others, with the usual bunch of dirty mountain men, plenty of Indians, and teepees camp outside along the walls. Pepper and I wonder if they are the same Indians that ambushed the wagons in front of us. I try not to look at them all with hatred, but it's hard not to when I think they could hurt us and women and babies and families like ours. We set up camp on the west side of the fort near the creek. Tall Joe brought us news after he talked with a man in charge. Seems the other wagons made it across the desert all right, but one of the young men stepped on a rattlesnake when he wandered into some brush. The bite is above his knee, and now the poison has spread so that his entire leg is black. Now, in our area, we live in Northwest Missouri. We don't have a lot of rattlesnake. I do know that we have some areas that you might find some, but it's not very common. So this is something that we don't really have to worry about. Now, some of you listening to this, you may have to worry about this. This is kind of new territory for me. That is crazy to think that your leg could be totally black from poison. I wonder, I'm kind of surprised they haven't amputated his leg by now. Because they said earlier that with her brother Benny, whenever he broke his arm, that if he would have broken it and the bone would have been poking out, they would have amputated his arm. So I know that they did do some amputation, so why aren't they amputating it? That's something interesting to me. His fever is high. When Tall Joe told us his name, I remembered him to be one of the young men that raced us across the Platte. A loud fellow, but nice. For some reason, this news made me so sick at heart. I just sat on the bank, staring at the water. What next, I thought. First, it was the little twins that got lost picking berries. Oh, do you remember that? We still don't know if they was ever found. Then it was Hemlock that killed poor Cassia and Wade's friends. There was the boy who fell off his parents' wagon, the mother who died by Chimney Rock. Suddenly my chest felt so heavy I burst out crying. Who will be next, Mama? Will Aunt June have her baby without bleeding to death? I'm tired of being brave. I'm tired of being dirty. I crawled in the wagon where no one could see me. I took off my dress. My bare white arms are bruised from the hailstones. There are many tiny scabs from mosquito bites. My wrists and hands are dry and cracked. What boy will ever think me nice to look at? Among the flour bags, I found my satchel and the spare dress still tucked inside. I unfolded it, pulled it over my head, and then tied the starched ribbon around my waist. Even though Ma said it's not to be worn until Oregon, I do not care. I want to feel pretty now. Next, I undid my braid and brushed my hair 100 strokes until at last it seemed like the dust was out. For near an hour, I tried to twist it on top of my head, like Ma does, but could not figure out how, so for now, we'll settle for a long braid. Later, when Ma saw me wearing my clean dress, she opened her mouth to say something, but instead gave me a slow smile. She opened her arms for me, then whispered, "How lovely you look, Hattie." That makes me want to cry. We stayed at Fort Hall for 2 days. It'll be a long time before we see civilization, so the men got extra parts to fix the wheels that most certainly will shrink and break in the dry air. This has been a problem since we left the Platte. Many broken wheels. It has been tiresome to watch so many repairs that I just have not bothered to describe them. The young man bitten by the rattlesnake died the evening before we pulled out. His family is devastated, but there is no time to mourn over his grave. Tall Joe says we must be going. Summer is almost over. Do you remember what happens when summer is over? They could get stuck in the mountains, and we don't want that, do we? Next day, we are heading west along the Snake River and shall do so for about 300 miles. I have never seen such a torrent of wild water. The river is far below us, running between black canyon walls that twist sharp here and there. Even though we're in sight of so much water, getting down to it is another matter. Forget to mention, back at Fort Hall, Pa and some of the other men found enough straps to build a cart for Mr. Big. The wheels are such that Mr. Big can roll them with his arms and get around on his own. He invited Benny to sit on his lap for a ride, and away they went, bumping through the sagebrush and around the outside of the wagons twice. I am taking care not to scratch my arms so that they won't bleed and ruin my dress. Aunt June gave me one of her prettiest aprons to wear over my dress. It is blue with two pockets and ruffle hem. Do you remember what happened with Mr. Big? He was in an accident and he lost both of his legs. So in the midst of all of this, someone stole his cart. They think it might have been Mrs. Kinker, but they're not. No one's seen her do it, so they can't be sure. Another day, 4 Indians on horseback appeared out of a canyon as we were starting supper. Their dark hair was braided and their legs were bare except for moccasins. Tall Joe rode over to them with his hand raised in greeting. The Indians, turns out, were friendly. They just wanted to warn Tall Joe about some Blackfeet who are out looking for trouble. One of the men had a bundle of fur draped over his horse's rump. He pushed it to the dirt and motioned for Tall Joe to take it. It was a buffalo skin to help our leader stay warm at night. A gift, he seemed to be saying. Tall Joe picked it up, put it around his shoulders, then walked over to his own saddlebag. He dug around in it and pulled out a small sack of tobacco, which he tossed to his new friend. I have decided Indians are like white folks, in that some are honest and kind and others are liars and thieves. After supper, I almost made an awful mistake. I almost took Pa's rifle and marched over to Mrs. Kinker to give her a piece of my mind, and that's how mad I was. Ugh, that would not have been good. Do not ever do that. You let adult things be adult things, and never ever, violence is never the solution for anything. There she was, serving pie to some folks, her hair combed pretty on top of her head, smiling, of all the nerve, wearing Aunt June's other beautiful apron, the white lace one we thought we left drying on the bush at Bear River. The reason I did not yell at Mrs. Kinker was because Aunt June saw me thinking about it and grabbed my arm. She said, "Leave it. Go, Hattie." "But it's yours." "Yes," she said, "but I think Mrs. Kinker needs it more than I do. It's only an apron, Hattie. It ain't worth making a fuss." But to me it ain't just an apron. It was Ma's spoon, Benny's sweater, and all the other things. I hate Mrs. Kinker. She gets away with being sneaky because she's old and smiles nice, and most folks is too busy to keep an eye on her. Or the folks that do know her tricks keep quiet because it's easier and it's not fair. I myself, I am very sad that my own sisters are dead, but I don't steal from people. If I did, Pa would be quick to whoop me and make me apologize. He don't allow dishonesty in our family. I think that's a good lesson, that there are times that we can have sadness, and there can be things that are going on in our life that we have to make sure that we are treating others how we want to be treated. We cannot be treating others in a hateful way. We have to be doing what is right. Hattie wants justice, and Hattie wants what things to be, she wants Mrs. Kinker to treat everyone with respect, and she wants Mrs. Kinker to treat everyone else the way that she should be treated. But she's not being treated that way. But that's not her job. That's not her judge. She should not be judging, and she is not an adult. She should not be making those decisions for her. But the only person that Hattie can control right now is herself. And she is right. She has hurt in her life. She's lost 4 of her siblings, and she could be grieving, and she could be making some sad choices just like Mrs. Kinker, and she's not. And I'm very proud of her for making those wise choices of being good and being kind and being loving. So I hope that you can take those, think about that the next time that something is going on in your life, and instead of being grumpy or hateful or mean, instead of snapping, or instead of hitting or being, like, choose to be kind and choose to be to treat others how you want to be treated, instead of treating them the way that you really want to treat them, because sometimes we really want to just be mean back, right? But that's not how we should be treating them. I hope that you have enjoyed this section of the learning about the Oregon Trail and what the life was like. Today we read on from pages 96 to 106, and we ended along the Snake River. I'll show you really quickly. The Snake River goes this way, so they're going on the Snake River right here. So tomorrow we'll be reading more about that. Thanks for joining me.